Going live on YouTube.
Okay. Is there, okay, the first thing is to approve the minutes, even though after tonight we don't have to. Let's go ahead and approve them anyways, in case somebody has some comments. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move we approve minutes.
And a second? Okay. And is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, our minutes are approved. Okay, Heather, is there anybody that wants to join our meeting? Any of the public?
There is nobody in the waiting room.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to the new agenda. The first item is Lansing needs a representative for the Environmental Management Council, which is a county advisory group. And Andrea was previously our EMC person, but she can no longer do it because of a new job she has. So we are looking for anybody from the Conservation Advisory Council that might be interested in representing Lansing in the EMC.
I could do that.
You can do that?
Mhm.
Okay. Anybody else interested?
I'm going to be a backup, I guess, or something for John.
Okay. Okay.
It
So-
seems like kind of up my bailiwick.
Okay. Great. That's great.
That would be a backup for Evan, David.
Oh, Evan, I didn't catch that. Okay, Evan. Oh, okay.
So do I have a motion to approve Evan as the new representative for the EMC that we're going to recommend to the town board?
Yeah, I think the wording would be that we move to recommend
Yeah.
Evan to, I think the town board then needs to approve it and connect with the EMC. So I could make that motion. I move to recommend Evan to the Lansing Town Board for the EMC and David Wolf as understudy backup.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, cool. This will be fun, David.
Yeah, okay, Evan. Yeah.
Do I have a second? Okay. All in favor?
Hi.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, Robin has abstained. Everybody else is in favor. Is that right?
I don't think I did.
I
Okay.
thought Robin seconded.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it's unanimous then, is that right?
I think so.
And that was like a once a week meeting is kind of the main, once a month meeting. was the
Yes, yes.
Main thing. Yeah, so Evan, in the course of a year, you may easily have some time when you've got a conflict or something, so you can contact me.
Okay.
And
Yeah, and I'll just keep you posted on,
that kind of thing.
what I'm doing or
Yeah.
what have you, so that it's not a lurch if that happens.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Tom and I can be doing is remembering that it would be wonderful to hear from the two of you about what's happening on the EMC. And we have not been putting it on our agenda. And so that's something that we could improve on in 2022 and make sure that you have an opportunity to fill us in on, just a few things that are going on at the county level that might have some application to Lansing.
mean, we're of course always free to attend those meetings. If CJ, I think, often sends around the agenda, but if she doesn't, I can. Because sometimes they have, you know, like a special speaker each month that might have a very appropriate topic for people to tune in on too.
Great. Yeah, that would really be good, Karen, because just to have the reminders, and especially if you're kind of vetting the different emails that come through, it'd be super.
Yeah, and so Evan, basically
Yeah.
what your responsibility, you know, as the rep would be to report very briefly when they do their go round about what we're working on, you know, so you could say, well, we've got, you know, we're about to start an open space plan, we're working on the scenic resources thing, you know, but it doesn't have to be in any kind of depth or even knowledge as much as just being a point person to always go back and, you know, if there are members of the EMC from, you know, from other municipalities who may be interested in what we're doing, then you can just come back to, you know, if you don't have an immediate answer, you can just come back to CJ or the rest of the committee or put it out to us in email, and then you would just be that point of contact. So
Perfect.
it's, you know, it's pretty
Yeah.
fun. The meetings, I think they're still at 4:30 on Thursdays, Tuesdays. Ugh,
Thursdays.
Thursdays. Yeah. It's a little bit of a weird time job, but
I look forward to it. Yeah, I always take good notes. Well, or remember things fairly well, I think. And I look forward to, you know, really kind of getting to know people from these other municipalities. And I think that there's probably a lot of common ground that we can find to, like, you know, kind of give the sense of continuity and improve the sense of place in, you know, in the county. And it's an honor that you all have approved me or recommended me to that position. I appreciate it.
perfect. Well, thanks for offering.
All right, great. I guess I'll go ahead and draft a letter to the town board to recommend Evan and David.
Be great.
Okay. Okay. Conservation criteria for the town of Lansing. This is the conservation easement discussion.
Yeah, I have it open. I'm just gonna share a version that's a little bit older. I see somebody's changed it since about 5 p.m. So I'm gonna roll it back. And now my phone is ringing. Sorry. So I was gonna walk us through that, and I just want to put it back to the last version that I saw. It looks like somebody made some changes since then, but I'd rather share the version that I saw last, and maybe we can, or if there was a reason for that, maybe speak up.
It might have been me, Robin, because there were 2 columns that were totally blank, and I wasn't sure you were going to get it all on one screen when I was looking through the comments later this afternoon. So I just removed the first column and the column right next to John Fleming's comments.
There's a stray character in A1. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
I can remove that. I will remove that. Remove.
It's okay. I don't see any starting. This is you didn't do much, Carrie, right? Can I just restore this version?
No, I
Did
didn't.
anybody changed this substantial? Okay, I'm just gonna restore this. sorry if I obliterated anybody's comments. It looked like this column was gone, which I think we actually do need. So, so what this is, for those of us who are new or haven't thought about it in a while, is that the town has the option to hold these conservation easements, and property owners can voluntarily enter into an agreement with the town that they will restrict certain development rights on their land. And in fact, there has already been one landowner that approached the town and would have liked to have done that, but they ended up selling their property. It sold too quickly for this to matter. But we decided at that time that it would be good to have some evaluation criteria in place, so that if it comes up again, and we hope that it does, we would have some metrics for evaluating whether or not we want to hold that, because there is some, administrative burden to the town to hold these. So we don't want to just be accepting any property. So this was originally, it's hard to see it now, but this was originally a form, and I'm just going to kind of highlight the form part of it. Maybe can you see the blue highlighting? The first two columns, it really is just a form, and then everything else over here is our comments on the form. So if that wasn't obvious, I apologize. This has been doctored a lot, but the idea is that we would fill out this form. So, your name, John Smith, this is your property address, tax ID number, and then we would kind of go through this form as a committee and fill it out and say, how many points does this property get? Is it a high priority? Do we want to hold a conservation easement for it? And what I will do is just kind of walk us through these individual parts of the form, and I've had a chance to read everyone's comments, at least the comments that were in there by about 4:30. So I read them, and we can walk through them. And the first one, actually, is a really good question, is should there be a minimum acreage? The one and only time we were approached, it was a very small parcel. I forget how many acres, but I want to say less than 5, maybe 1.2, 1.5, something like that. So CJ was actually made the very good point that she would recommend at least a minimum acreage. I kind of threw 5 out there. It looks like Tom suggested 1 acre. And there's a comment over here about, I guess this is a comment about the full parcel acreage versus just the acreage that the conservation easement would be on, if I'm interpreting that comment correctly. So what does the committee think? What is a reasonable minimum acreage? And keeping in mind that there's a monitoring requirement, there's some administrative burden. We wouldn't necessarily want to do it for a property that's pretty small, that wouldn't have some of these later features that we'll talk about in just a minute.
Yeah, I would say certainly no less than 5 and possibly no less than 10.
Tom, do you want to defend your 1 acre?
Well, so going for the example that we had, Sue Ruoff's property, that was less than 5 acres, but it was a parcel that was right on Salmon Creek, and it had the potential of connecting with another parcel, which would have connected also to basically DEC land at Salt Point and the fishing access. So I thought that it was a particularly special piece of land. And so that's why, there may be some particular parcels that are really special. For example, right on Salmon Creek, that should get special treatment. So that's
Could these be viewed as like guidelines and not like, strict rules? And so we could have like a guideline of 5 acres, but always open to discussion of.
I like that idea.
So not refer to them as like hard and fast I don't know, these aren't really defined here, but not like these are, set in concrete rules, but more like guidelines. Why make this a little easier for us to, move along and make some decisions, but still leave open the possibility of exceptions?
Well,
Yeah, I
along that,
agree. I don't
Go
think
ahead.
administrative overhead is really a good reason to limit it to 5.
Yeah. I think 5 acres is a good guideline. I would say, but as Tom mentioned, there could be places where we really want to have some discussion about, is this really exceptional? So,
If it were to be under 5 acres, it would have to rate in my opinion, it would have to rate so very high in terms of either rare plants. I'm not thinking that the riparian area is even going to be an issue, because there's going to be setback regulations from zoning. And so again, like I remain very strongly opposed to anything like that Ruoff easement. I thought it was terrible. And having done conservation easements for 15 years, I would say it would be a burden. So I would think, from my experience, I think it would have to be extraordinary, either in one of the highest rated UNAs that we have, known plant incidences, known ecological community incidences that rate highly, because everybody and anybody can fall in love with their 1.5 acre woodland
May I?
in their backyard. So that's I may end up being this sort of extreme curmudgeon on on that argument, but I just want to give that pushback also.
Yeah, I want to add to. I'm sorry, who was just speaking? It's not
Aaron.
telling. I want to add to what Aaron had to say there, and also what David was saying. I think that there, in some cases, are a lot of places that are very special. Probably an acre of endangered plants would have other protections already. I don't know that isn't already covered. And also, when you start making, loosening or things like that, you might, and I don't know the people of Tompkins County well enough to really judge this at all. I'm not trying to. I'm just saying there may be an eventuality that, people exploit that, or is there any legal consideration there where potentially we'd be protecting a class of people that has very nice acre lots and ignoring other folks or something? I don't know well enough currently.
It's about conservation values and not sociological issues from my standpoint. But just to like respond to your first comment, no, sometimes people have, very interesting, I don't know, like a cliff face or something that actually may or may not have been surveyed in a unique natural area, or just not even included, where in the process of investigating whether this should be a conservation easement, unique whatever is discovered, and just no, it would not necessarily already be protected. Far from it. There's only a pretty small percentage of the unique natural areas in Tompkins County that are officially protected. They're mostly privately owned.
But if there were endangered or threatened plants, to some extent, that's those areas are protected for that reason.
The plants are, but the area isn't.
Right, the plants themselves would be, but not necessarily the land.
Well,
What if
given
we
that-
just put like minimum acre suggestion is 5, that leaves it open if somebody comes up with some really stellar, awesome 1
So-
acre of something.
I have a thought, Robin. Given that this entire rating sheet is going to be on a scale of 0 to 3, why couldn't we say the property acreage is greater than 5 acres or 10 acres, whatever threshold we have, and then we give that 3 points, and that contributes to the total. And if it's less than that, it's 0 points. So that indicates, okay, we have an interest in parcels that are not postage stamps. However, if the parcel rates really highly in all these other categories, then it can be considered because it's got a high enough score.
Okay, did I capture your comment? More than 5 acres, 3 points. Less than 5 acres, 0 points. So nothing in between.
Just an idea. I don't know what people think about it.
There are so many other metrics on this list. I don't think that one item out of, however many dozen or so that we have is going to actually be enough to make a difference in the mix. We had also talked about there being some sort of a, other weighting scale in this, but it could get, the math could
Yeah.
get complicated.
Yeah, I mean, this is for me like an interesting starting point was that actually CJ suggested 2 kind of base criteria that are just minimums, and we wouldn't even consider it if it was less than that. And the first one was a minimum acreage. The second, which was not really corresponding to any particular thing, but was just a general criterion, like a checkbox maybe, that a parcel must be developable so that there is a real and public benefit to the town. So that was another criteria. So these could be considered, sort of minimum criteria for consideration. I'm not exactly.
Like entrance requirements or something. So,
Yeah, but Robin, let's just say that it's on a steep slope that isn't developable, but it still has value for, either not being, well, particularly not being logged if it's thin, steeply sloping soils or topography. That's not developable, and so it would fail that criteria right out of the gate. You know what I'm saying? And actually, steep slopes and would be, I would think, it's in contrast to some of the other things I think that we talked about, especially around soils.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't mean it's not a conservation area that's worthy. I wonder if CJ's point was that we should be prioritizing areas that are in jeopardy or vulnerable to development. And I don't personally know, like from a planning perspective, how if a non-developable steep slope property is just de facto protected because it doesn't have any potential for development. Maybe Tom could speak to that since we don't have CJ here.
you could switch the word developable to, of value to the public or the town, I guess, because something could be of scenic value. And anyway, so it's hard to get into. This is such a complicated big table. I hate to get into all these things, but.
Well, just to address the developable part, my recollection is that CJ said if the parcel can't be developed, then essentially it is protected from development. So, for example, if it's too small or it's landlocked, then there are other restrictions already in place. And so I think that's why she felt like, listen, folks, we just need to have something that is even going to be threatened by development in our list of criteria.
Hmm.
Karen's example is it being exploited? You know, you're cutting down all the trees on it. You're not developing it. You're just extracting a resource. Is that something that we're trying to protect?
Well, we're trying to protect water quality for one thing, right? And that's not a developable resource per se. I just don't, I think that as an item, as a criterion, it can mean everything and can mean nothing. You know, considering when we're talking about conservation values, this is not purchase of development rights. This is a conservation easement, and those two things are really, really different. You know, like you would do a purchase of development rights in an ag setting, because those flat or sloping farm fields, instead of being in agriculture, could be tract houses, right? So you purchase the development rights when you're doing ag easements. When you're doing conservation easements, there are lists of conservation values that have to do with the ecology of a site. In my experience, not the developable ability of the site, and they're dramatically different from one another.
So I'm hearing that we don't necessarily want this because still could be of conservation value, even if it is on a parcel that is not considered commercially developable.
Well, I mean, what if those vernal pools across the street from you? You know, they're not developable unless you're gonna fill them in, or you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
But can they, if they can't be developed, are they secretly protected because nobody can do anything with it? Or I mean, would people, convert it into some kind of, I don't know, sewage pond or something? I don't know that anybody would, but I'm just to make a fake example. I guess I kind of see CJ's point, but I don't know enough about it to know if they, I don't know. This is hard. This spreadsheet is hard.
Yeah, but it's also good. It's great that you've done this much work on it, because I think it's really getting us to talk about what we value and what we want for the future of Lansing.
I mean, I might suggest going back and looking at the conservation easement template that the town of Danby did, which speaks strongly to conservation metrics.
What did we base it off of? I don't think they had any minimum acreage that I could see or mention development. But there are certainly others out there other than the one we used as a template.
Do they have a defined purpose for what the easements are? Because like right now, we're somewhat confused about whether or not development is an issue with it versus strictly conserving resources. So I think we kind of have to have that defined to help determine how we want to go forward with that.
Mhm.
Because I would agree more with Karen that our intent would be more on the conservation of what's there, and
I would also get behind that.
I mean, I have to think about, where both the acreage and the developable thing comes, creates some problems for me is, a habitat can be highly unique for some reason. Particularly think of it being a habitat for, some particular, it's the last remaining habitat that supports pileated woodpeckers or something. I don't know, something like that. Or so it's the, so some of these things So that's what's kind of, I mean, I think conservation can come down to that sort of level, I think sometimes. So it's the last remaining blah, blah, blah in the region, you know, so.
If I read CJ's comment like as an inverse, that if it is not developable already, then there is no public benefit to.
Yeah, so I
town.
guess where she's going is like it's already protected in a certain way. Is that right? Where
Yeah.
it's like it would automatically be protected because it's not. Is that the idea? It would.
Yeah, like there's no benefit to the
There's
town.
but nobody would come in to try to develop it because it's undevelopable.
Well,
Right.
what about Todd's point that, you know, there's an old growth forest and somebody is not going to develop it. They're just going to cut it down.
I think it's a valid point.
Okay, so maybe we overrule. I'm just gonna put this for now.
Okay,
We
that's
overruled
scary.
CJ's comment about a
Oh,
base
that's scary.
criteria.
Well, David's
Give-
point that it's a guideline, I think is,
Yeah, we can hedge our bets that way. I'm always
Yeah.
good at hedging bets. Yeah.
I'm kind of hearing that we don't want to put hard, fast, like.
Yeah, I think we should
Boundaries on
start
this.
that way. I think we should start that way, not trying to, like, because otherwise it'll take us forever to get through more than a few of these. But
Yeah, we got to get through it.
do some a broad cut of things, you know, and some general guidelines, and we can fine tune later maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think it's smart to be thinking of exceptions to the rule, you know, and there are parcels where, you know, they're going to meet all these criteria and then they're going to be these unique things. So I think we're going about it the right way, even though it's messy.
Okay. Fortunately, I don't think many of them are very controversial. Those may have been the most controversial ones. This is where the form actually starts. Those were just 2 additional criteria
Oh,
as
now
an
we're starting.
afterthought. We haven't even started. So maybe we can just, it looks like there's a lot of consensus in the comments. So maybe we can just hit the highlights that if it's adjacent to or containing town parklands, public outdoor recreation areas, it gets 1 point. Anything that I didn't put a 2 or a 3 on is just a default 1 point. So you would get a point for that if we were evaluating your property.
Can I just ask John about his comment, not necessarily permanent use?
Yeah, I was just saying that just because today it's a park or it's a trail or something, doesn't mean that that's always going to be what that adjacent property is, you know, would be used for necessarily.
That's right.
It's not like it's, you know, like a conservation easement supposed to be forever. These are not necessarily forever things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think with, you know, parklands and outdoor recreation areas, we should be cautious to distinguish between highly managed, manicured, to my point, golf courses and athletic fields versus land that is actually serving a conservation value. And so it would extend that natural land by however much further, you know, the 10 additional acres. You know, yeah, there are going to be some ones in the middle, like the Lansing Center Trail. I think that still very much counts as a conservation space, but not golf courses where there's, you know, spraying the heck out of it, or athletic fields where there's not any grassland birds that are going to be able to hang out in that unforested area. You know, that doesn't promote a conservation value. That gives you a little postage stamp of woods next to a recreation center. So I think there's some nuances that are missing from that line. I would just clarify it to say naturally natural lands or conservation lands, or I don't know, something along that. I just would not want to see this as a buffer to a golf course.
Do we want to say permanently conserved natural landscapes? Or natural areas?
Why do you want to say permanent?
Well, to John's point, I'm thinking about the Ithaca golf course now. They're hacking down all the trees and on Warren Road, and it's just like, wow, if anybody had used that as a criterion, it's going to look radically different in a few years. And it's, I realize we're excluding golf courses, but even our Lansing Center Trail, I mean, I don't know how permanent that is.
Mhm.
So it's not that gets no points, but it's not as, it shouldn't rank as high, as it would if it were permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, if you see the next one, I think this next one hints at that, adjacent to conserved land and preserves, which is a much higher level of conservation, land owned by this is Finger Lakes Land Trust, this abbreviation. Nature Conservancy, although I don't know if we have any of those in the town of Lansing, or other private non-profit. Don't know what those would be, but like Sapsucker Woods maybe, or something that was, kind of permanently conserved. So this would get if it's a yes, in this case, we get a 2 because we're saying as a group, we want to rate it a 2, but one person voted for a 3, so we could put a 3. Weight this one a little higher. So there's kind of that distinction. You get additional points if it's actually conserved, maybe not permanently, but formally conserved.
The Emily Jonas property, which is privately, the Falls property is privately owned, and it is listed on the Tompkins County Open Space Plan as a nature preserve, but there's no legal standing to that. So it would be very. I want to look into how it is how they managed to designate that on the county level when it doesn't have permanent protection at all. It's unlikely to be developed, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Karen's referring to a hiking trail that's on private land, but my understanding is the landowners have given a public right-of-way access to hike a nature trail, but the land itself is privately owned. So like if that were to come up as an option and we wanted to have a conservation easement there, that would meet some of our other criteria, but it's actually not on conserved land as far as I know, and I could be ill-informed, but if you go to the website, it says that it's privately owned land. Please do not trespass, don't go off the trail, because it's definitely not public land.
And the trail has been closed for several years because of safety issues.
I don't think it has. I was just hiking there on my birthday and it was wide open. There's other people there, so.
I mean, people might be there, but the last I had heard was that the erosion had been so bad that it was deemed unsafe.
There's no signage or closure, barricades or anything. Just
a good example.
From last time I was there anyway.
Hmm.
Anyway, just as an example, if we can identify a parcel that we want, ideally it would, would have some of these higher percentage criteria that we're looking at. So really the only question here is it a 2 or a 3? And I think we can just move on and not deliberate over that too much. We all agree that next to a formal preserve would be great.
Yeah.
Next one is very hypothetical because we don't have any adjacent to town conservation easements, including lands participating in the town's conservation easement exemption program. Well, there aren't any as far as I know last time we heard. So this is really just a theoretical thing. And the idea could be like, if let's say I put my property under conservation easement and my neighbor then decides that they want to add their acreage to it, maybe they should get an extra point for that, or that would be something they would get a point for. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Knowing that we don't really have any.
If like that's sort of a freebie
Sounds
one.
good. Sounds good.
Okay, the next three, we kind of agreed to that we don't really need that, and then nobody commented otherwise, so I'm gonna skip over those. Adjacent to wildlife corridors, other greenways. Can everybody read this text? Do I need to enlarge it?
It's a little small.
Maybe I can make it bigger. Okay. Adjacent to a wildlife corridor, wildlife travel pathways between habitat patches, etc. Karen and I talked about this a little bit. There's vast difference in scale for animal migration, and habitat connectivity means different things to different animals. So we talked about an example, like at my property, I live near this salamander migration pathway where they migrate from vernal pools to the lake, or to a wetland. What did you say, David?
I immediately thought of salamanders as being like a small animal corridor. Yeah.
Oh, and every year I spend hours just picking them off the road and trying not to let them get killed. And it's this whole just hundreds of them every spring and fall. It's definitely a migration pathway that's specific to that animal. And of course, birds migrate at a different scale. A bear moving across the landscape would have a different idea of what a wildlife corridor is. So I find this one to be really fuzzy, but I still like it. I still want to keep it. I think it might just be something that is kind of self-reported, like, oh, I know there's a salamander pathway, or, oh, I know that fishers move through my area, or, we have we're on the lake shore and, birds move down the lake. I don't really know, because to me, people like to talk about wildlife corridors, but it's really, really specific to the animal, and it could be very small. It could be very large. So I actually, CJ put a document to look at for a Tompkins County habitat connectivity plan in here. I really didn't like it because they grossly misused the word habitat. They just basically, habitat is specific to an animal. It's not just a patch of land. I can't just look out my window and say, look at that great habitat, because it's forest. It's not a habitat for a grassland bird. So let's just think of habitat as a specific concept for an animal. So if it's a big patch of grassland, that is connectivity. It doesn't mean contiguous forest. So I like this criteria. That being said, Karen's comment here is that it's very hard to delineate. Carrie adds, if we build it, they will come. I kind of like that philosophy too. I really had strong feelings about was CJ's comment about that plan, which I don't know who's involved with that, but I don't like their pervasive misuse of the word habitat.
And I had a question about that plan. So I looked through it, and Lansing is omitted from what
entirely. That's the other. I put in my comment here. They didn't have any priority areas in Lansing.
Nothing. I was all excited. I was like, oh my gosh, why reinvent the wheel? And then I'm reading through and realizing everything at the end has to do with the southern part of the county. So it was a little disappointing that they hadn't identified for us. That's not totally true. In the very beginning, Salmon Creek was shown, and along the lake was shown.
Yeah.
Why restricting this to adjacent to? What if it is a wildlife corridor? Why wouldn't we promote a conservation easement for a wildlife corridor as opposed to something adjacent to one?
The idea of that's a great question. The idea of a wildlife corridor is is not necessarily that it's going to fall on one specific person's property. There generally would be very huge, like a bird's migratory pathway, or out west, there are efforts to connect isolated patches of grizzly habitats so that grizzlies can move across, the Rockies or the Canadian border. So a wildlife corridor can mean a lot of different things, and is usually
certainly creeks and that sort of thing fall in this category, of course. Yeah.
What was that?
Creeks and that sort of thing fall into this category, of course. corners.
Yeah, creeks, linear
really like this
features,
one a
especially
lot.
for fish.
I happen to like this one quite a bit. I just think, obviously, people could, people get extreme and say there's some little tiny spider that they've identified as being, or it could get, if it gets extreme. But I think this is, I like this one. That's
I
just,
mean, I can definitely make it say adjacent to or contains a
yeah,
wildlife corridor, but
Okay.
it'd be a rare parcel that would contain entirely a wildlife corridor. Like if my property had both a pond and a vernal pool, that might be the entirety of it, but generally it would be something larger than that. Another thing I'd encourage the group to think about is, even though they're not very scenic, transmission right-of-ways can act as a wildlife corridor and wildlife
sure.
pathway. They certainly work for introducing invasive species. They've used that wide open free
I like this one
free
too. I
land.
agree with everything, but I think this goes back to that whole 5 acre thing. You could imagine like a small parcel being a barrier to a wildlife corridor.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It could be a concrete wall.
Yeah, that's not an acre.
You said that. Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that comes to mind is to kind of just to throw out a possible concern from some members of the community would be, a lot of people really hate deer, and deer have certain favored corridors. I could see finding it hard to argue you can't develop, a certain area because deer like to pass through your backyard and eat your garden plants, Anyway, I don't know. It's just, there can be some opposition to some of this, but anyway, that being said, I really like this one. I think it's pretty crucial, especially in terms of climate change. There's a lot of arguments, a lot of literature about we need to maintain wildlife corridors for species that are mobile, able to move as the climate changes and things like that. So
I think if we start to see more large scale solar in Lansing, what we might see is more discrete, like wildlife traveling pathways. If there's these huge landscapes full of solar panels and little kind of linear things going from the north to the south end of town, we might see that becoming more of a wildlife corridor, although that word is very specific to the animal, but just something to think about. This might be very hard to actually evaluate.
yeah,
have to use aerial
we have it in
imagery
there. I think
and just a person's local knowledge to evaluate that. So anyway, that's that one. This next one is sort of a gimme, a wetland. Obviously, wetlands are important. And then there would be a pointing system based on if it was a smaller wetland or a larger wetland. So we did actually combine these two things. We're going to stay away from DEC wetlands and use the specific federal or county designated wetlands. And everybody pretty much agreed on that. So that's wetlands. Potential wetland or temporary wetland. So a vernal pool would be an example of a temporary wetland. These are seasonally wet areas. I just kind of guessed and said 1 point. It's difficult to understand how to evaluate it. Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. Wetlands smaller than an acre don't get mapped on that federal thing that you use.
No, federal wetlands can get really, really small. It's the DEC wetlands that have to be over 12.4.
12.4.
12.4 acres.
Is there any scale where temporary and vernal pool, tiny little seasonal wetlands show up?
They're not really well documented because it is going to depend on, sort of the vicissitudes of climate for one thing, and seasonal weather variations. So I don't know, and they change from year to year. Like there was a temporary wetland on George Road in Dryden for the longest time, and it was like the greatest birding spot, and then the drainage changed and it's no longer there, so Yeah, hydrology,
Yeah,
hydrology, perspective.
beavers, whatever, yeah. I don't really follow the ecology literature on this, but I just recall seeing a number of papers talking about, people, there are ecologists who argue very strongly for protecting vernal pools in terms of species and stuff like that, but I don't know much, I don't know a lot of the details.
Well, it's definitely critical for, for salamander
And amphibians and yeah, right, yeah.
conservation, for sure.
Should I bump it up to a 2?
I would lean that way.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I think especially if, because the landowners who are proposing conservation easements on their land presumably know the land well. We would be relying on them to provide some documentation, and that could be super helpful if it's not something that's been mapped by a governmental entity. That may be quite compelling.
Okay. We'll keep that one. The next one contains land within floodplains adjacent to local streams, their tributaries, or Cayuga Lake. And Karen had some feelings about the current maps and wanted to wait for the newer ones to evaluate this criteria. CJ says they're coming soon. I just generally don't know if we know where floodplains are, so I'm not too sure about that one. But
what's interesting about floodplains, again, coming back to the climate change stuff, which I follow, is basically they are expanding everywhere, including our area. So, what was a floodplain, the boundaries of a floodplain yesteryear are in general expanding. So just that's just context information.
do we have a way to know this? Like if Karen or CJ or David looks at their GIS, they can tell us.
Well, I mean, I know that the USGS is, for example, expanding the floodplain zones for Ithaca. This is it's happening throughout the Midwest. So a lot of corn farmers who, thought a third of their land was in a floodplain now realize 2/3 of their land is in a floodplain. So it's just happening. And there's a lot of talk in the Finger Lakes and Ontario Lake about maintaining soft shorelines instead of what they call hard shorelines, because the lakes are basically, the shorelines are expanding in terms of their ebb and flow seasonally, so that, if we cement and dam up all the shorelines, we just can't keep doing that. We need to kind of have soft shorelines because the lakes and so a lot of talk about that stuff these days with climate change. So I don't know what that means in terms of this particular issue. I'm just saying that these are not a static. What a floodplain is not a static thing. What was a 100-year flood is a 50-year flood. Things like that. We've heard about, and it also means that how wide flood zones are expanding in our area, is not just along the sea coast, ocean coast, or something like that. So,
and NPR just ran a story tonight about how we're going to get more and more storms in the Northeast and more flooding. So I actually think this is worth keeping in here, and weighting it at a 2 or a 3 is fine with me.
Any particular feelings, 2 versus 3? I don't think it should be more important than a wetland. It should be maybe a 2.
Yeah, probably a 2. So that's 2 sounds good to me. At least it's provides some information that this is, kind of important. Yeah.
I just posted in the chat the current draft of the new 2022-23 flood maps, and there are definitely some areas that I would very much agree with how they're mapped. And thankfully those are the ones in Lansing, but there are some really, really big problems with at some other places, particularly downtown, that just didn't make any sense. And I have no idea why that happened. So places that are known to flood, off the flood maps, places that have never, ever, ever flooded before were put on the flood maps, particularly locations downtown. So there's going to be a lot of public input to this, but just if you wanted to take a look at what they look like now. Lansing, particularly Salmon Creek around Ludlowville, looks pretty solid. Solid, floatable. But
Aaron, I can't hear you.
you can't hear me?
No.
It's a
Your
little
volume
unclear.
is your volume is really, really low for some reason. for me.
Oh, okay, hold on.
I heard some of it that the floodplains are very poorly determined in downtown, and also Salmon Creek and Ludlowville are in a floodplain. That's sort of what I heard.
So yeah, so there are parts of downtown that are very much in error, but there are parts like the Salmon Creek in Ludlowville seems to be like they didn't have a problem with it. I'm suspecting because it's much more natural vegetation, they were able to model it better. But downtown and Trumansburg have some really big problems. So I'm just to say that link that I put up there is not the final version, but it should give you a sense of how different things are now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it sounds like we have an objective way to determine this, and that way is decent for Lansing, and we'll get better. So
I think the USGS is the entity, I mean, Todd would know better than me, but that looks into floodplain boundaries. And I thought that the USGS was actually like around the inlet area of Ithaca. There was some changes, might even, different changes in requirements of flood insurance and things like that were brought up. Anyway, I'm not on top of all this stuff, but
yeah, that may be the case, David, but there were places like near the commons that they were showing as in the flood zone. Definitely not. Yeah. And Trumansburg, which has historically been underwater in big hurricanes, was not. So yeah, it's just they're still tweaking it.
Yeah.
okay.
Can somebody help me with this a little bit? Is this a form that we're going to use to identify places we want easements, or is this something that is open to the public to use to request easements?
Both.
Or both? Okay.
Both.
Because I think, I mean, the FEMA stuff is all great and everything, but I think flood prone areas is probably better than flood plains, because there's a lot of places that get flooded that aren't a floodplain. They just happen to be at the bottom of a hill when all the water rushes off and they get flooded. So I don't put all my money in the FEMA maps for high flood risk areas.
Good point.
Should I change this to say floodplains or flood prone areas?
I think so, because
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's some places in Ludlowville that are actually out of the floodplain, but they get flooded because they're at the bottom of these big gullies that come down, screaming down the hill slope.
Yeah, and we're having these kind of, one-off but extreme rainfall events that, it's not creating a flood, it's not part of a flood plain, but, these areas could be vulnerable in those cases.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, the mall flooded a few years ago.
Yeah.
The whole mall was flooded, so it's certainly flood prone, whether or not it was a floodplain. Okay, I think we should move on to the streams. Contains or creates a buffer to a stream, river, vegetated stream side area to filter pollutants, reduce flooding, again with the flooding, and habitat diversity for plants and animals. And then we would give it 2 points if it was 100 feet or less. And if it was at least as wide as 300 feet, it would give 3 points. We did in fact combine this with, just to reduce the number of items. And it looks like everybody agreed with that.
Yeah, that's important. It's also sedimentation, and pollutants going into the lake and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I like that too. Now, would the easement be just that area, or do we need 5 acres around it?
5 acres in total if we impose that minimum, and then if any
In that
part
would
of
have, yes, okay.
I would think if any part of it had any of these, it would get a point. That's we have no real world examples yet, but if that's really my interpretation. Some of you will love this one, and I had to ask if we even knew where these were, and I'm told that yes, we do know where the trout streams are. So if it's designated as a migratory fish run or a trout stream, it gets a point.
Yeah.
Somebody put 3 points. That must be somebody that likes to fish.
Yeah, yeah. I think some people, some fishermen would put that real.
Somebody thought it was worth a 3. I thought it was worth a 1.
Well, that's Salmon Creek. Salmon Creek's trout stream, and it's
Okay.
A spawning stream, so that's pretty valuable.
Is this really exciting? Should I make it a 3? Everything's a 3. Everybody gets a 3.
Well, okay, yeah, I mean, that's true. We're in danger of doing that. I agree. But trout are great integrators of like all the pollutant problems that have come into the thing. So if there are trout there, we already know that's a high value. Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong with it. I think that's one of the ways we know it's a highly valuable piece of water.
Yeah, it's the most regulated.
Okay, we'll give this a 3. I wasn't really sure about that and how important that was, or if we even had any, but yeah, let's give it a 3. Groundwater recharge area. I had a note here to ask David if we know what this is, and if we have a way to objectively say that an area is a groundwater recharge area.
It's another area where Todd knows it more than I know. But
Yeah.
Todd, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe Todd should chime in first.
Every place is a groundwater recharge area unless it's a stream. That's where the groundwater comes out again.
It could be like the permeability of the the soil and the subsurface and that stuff a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, we could look at it that way. If there's a karst, some sort of a limestone bedrock that might be really highly prone to contamination and allows a lot of water to permeate. So there might be ways to do that. Whoever said it's not well mapped is probably right. But we could ask somebody over at the USGS if they have good maps of that.
Yeah, this was work that Todd Miller was doing a lot before he left, and they did a lot in Danby and Caroline and never got to anywhere in Lansing.
Yeah, those guys are the experts.
Yeah, so the county has Salmon Creek listed as an aquifer, but it's not mapped in a at a degree of accuracy that would be helpful at all for something like this.
It's a candidate for one that we can delete because Todd said everywhere is a groundwater recharge area. So this is
Well, Todd, is
We
that
throw it away-
true
or is it a
in
throwaway?
Lansing, though? Because there's so much slate. Is that all karst?
No,
that's all like
So isn't it all?
That's different.
It's all. Is it all? At least over by me, it's got to be a lot of runoff. If I've gone into, the areas that we do have open out there, all the gorges, that's the whole thing with the topography around here, right? It's
Yeah,
all runoff.
that shallow shale causes lots of runoff.
So like the inverse of a groundwater recharge area is a runoff area, right? It's kind of.
Yeah, you could look at it that way.
impervious surface.
I mean, that's why we're
Essentially,
famous for all our nick points and water
Right.
and waterfalls, right? I mean,
Our impervious surface just happens to be 30 centimeters down. But yeah, let me take a look. Most of whoever said it was correct that most of our aquifers are right around our except for maybe Cortland. But yeah, it's a spider web. I have to go back and look and see. But I don't think this is a big deal.
Yeah.
This could be an asterisk if somebody happens to find one of these on their land. That maybe that's true, but Yeah, I don't know of any super, I can't think of any groundwater recharge areas that are very unique in Lansing, but I can check and get back to everybody.
I
Like
put a
major
strike through on
creeks.
it just because it sounds like it's too hard to evaluate. Everything can be potentially groundwater recharge unless it's pavement. So maybe this one we don't need, unless Todd, if you look into it and get back to me, we can bring it back, but I'm going to go ahead and strike it.
Let's yeah. Carrie, you've been monitoring your groundwater. Did you learn anything about groundwater recharge above your property?
That it's very difficult to determine exactly where it's being recharged. That's
Oh, well,
what
let's just strike it.
No practical way to evaluate it. So, okay, moving on. Forest patches, large forest patches get 1 to 2 points, and even bigger patches get 2 to 3 points. I didn't say that very well, but you can read it.
Yeah.
Forest patch size. I don't think Lansing, there was a 2,000 acre column. I don't think we have any 2,000 acre forest patches.
No, the biggest contiguous forest I think that we have is on the western wall of the Salmon Creek Valley, and it's about 800 or so.
So that's why it doesn't go up to 2,000, just 200 plus for
That's
simplicity.
reasonable.
Yeah.
It says
The only-
1 and 2, 1 point for any forest of this size and 2 points for that.
Yeah, I mean, I was the one who combined it, but I did wonder, is bigger better if we think about diverse landscapes? That's just sort of amusing, like that bigger is better.
Yes.
Because the other part of the landscape could be extremely valuable. So it's a little random.
It depends a little bit on the diversity of species and stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you not like the bigger is better theory? Should it just get 1 point? If
I like bigger.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
I definitely like bigger.
says the climate change guy.
Bigger is better.
There's justification either way. I can definitely live with it. It's fine.
No, it's speaking of it's first of all, a large forest area. It's going back to climate change. There's going to be a lot of there's going to be less erosion. A large forest area will tend to be more kind of self-contained, less runoff, that kind of thing often. So the soil's not disturbed a lot. It tends to absorb moisture, a good recharge area. So bigger, better. More groundwater recharge going up to the top, the one above that.
Yep.
Okay. The next one, I think we all love a unique natural area. Everybody said give it a 3, maybe a 2 if it's adjacent to a unique natural area. And these are mapped. We know where they are. We know we can objectively evaluate this. So that's easy. Then it's all in the name. They're unique natural areas, and they exist in wonderful databases full of information about rare plants and animal communities. So this is great. This one might be redundant, I'm not sure, but contains an area important for rare plants and animals. That could be distinct from a unique natural area. It's let's see.
It might
what
not
did I
been-
put here?
might not
How
have
do
been
we
some
know if it
designated.
contains it? Well, right, yeah. Okay, so maybe it wasn't maybe it's not a formal unique natural area. That's a good point. So an informal area that we know contains plants or animals that are rare. This is, again, I guess, how do we know unless the landowner knows, right? Are we gonna
Yeah, are
survey
there some
them?
areas in our area in Lansing that are, for example, the Cornell Botanic Garden owns some properties in the town of Lansing, don't they? The
Edwards Lake Cliff Preserve, for example.
right, that's what I'm thinking of, I think. There's some rare plants and animals there, and I don't know that that's a unique natural area, but
It is. It's
is it? Oh, it is, okay.
Robin, to your question, it would be possible to inventory the property that is being considered. But that's what the Finger Lakes Land Trust does.
Yeah, they could document that, right?
Is the
So,
burden on the land trust to do that, not the
really the
landowner?
burden's on the homeowner.
Okay.
The burden is on when the land trust takes a property, the burden, you're saying the burden is on the landowner to pay for the survey, Carrie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Unless they've changed.
Well, as part of it's as part of the fee for doing it, but if we're not charging a fee.
Well, actually, that's not a foregone conclusion. You know, just back to CJ's point that all of this takes resource and
Right.
you know, and we're kind of, I think, challenging that that you know, when we had the possibility that land could be donated to the town, I contacted through CJ Guy Crow, and he said there are a lot of ways that it's legitimate for the town to accept funding for conservation easements, but you just need to follow certain pathways. So it could be that money would need to accompany the donation. So just back to this idea of an inventory, it could be inventoried, and that would be really valuable, I think.
Okay, we have a ways to go. Maybe, I don't know, should I keep going? We have a lot of stuff to get.
Yeah.
You're doing great, I think.
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay, we crossed these out. I don't know if we want to talk about it, but
It sounds like it's being taken care of.
the
elsewhere,
short of
right?
it is that there are agricultural easements that are separate from conservation easements, and we just felt that these would be better under an agricultural easement.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna skip over them. However, under consideration, and CJ says this would be appropriate, is adjacency to active farmland, providing a buffer between the farmland and other land uses. So this one is up for consideration. And
John,
CJ's
you gave that a 0 or a 1,
Me?
I think.
0, that might be, John, is
Yeah,
that a 0 or
because
1?
Because it's not really dealing with a conservation, it's trying to allay your neighbor from not liking what you do next door, was kind of how I interpret it.
I put it as, I see like ag as like sort of halfway between like developed area that's not good for wildlife and, you know, pristine areas that are great for wildlife. Wildlife use it, they transit around it and through it. You know, that it could have some conservation value. It's just, we don't want to deal with the ag land itself, but the land adjacent to it could be considered having some conservation value. I put in the example of like snow geese and, you know, deer, turkeys, things that use ag fields might use land adjacent to it for cover and roosting and sleeping.
Correct.
So I think it has some value, but I'm open
the only issue I
to.
had was using it to reduce potential conflicts. I wouldn't really think that would apply, but your other comments in terms of, you know, wildlife using it would be valid.
So just this phrasing is bothering you.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you want to say something like, you know, absorbing excess nutrient or absorbing nutrient runoff before it gets to the lake, that could be a potential like buffer, right? It could be capturing some nitrogen before it runs into the lake, but maybe this is offensive because it sounds like people want to be buffered from
Yeah.
agriculture.
Good point. Why couldn't we
ourselves? Yeah.
What's that?
I said, and we should be able to deal with these conflicts with our neighbors ourselves, not have to have an easement to do it, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we could just put that phrase, I think, is takes away from that one.
Yeah, I like the wildlife thing. I mean, this is where the pheasants used to hang out, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's not a native species, but anyway. For example,
What if you just said adjacent to active farmland, providing wildlife and other benefits or something? Would that sort of meet all the concerns?
yeah, just hide it under the frame or under the term ecosystem services or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Love it.
Okay.
Got it.
Soil conservation, nutrient.
Runoff prevention or
Yeah,
something.
eroding, yeah.
Just making this up, but I can see how
Capturing
it would
nutrient
be.
runoff.
It would be valuable to be like, maybe for that you get a 1 point. It wouldn't affect the farmland because, it's just adjacent to. Okay. Land with soils or geology designated as high erosion potential or steep slopes. I say sure, but then I questioned it later on when I saw CJ's comment that such soils are already not developable. So maybe by CJ's standards, they already aren't going to be developed. Karen says yes, obviously they have impacts on water quality. Steep soils are highly erodible. So I'm not sure quite what to do with this one.
Yeah, again, I think development shouldn't be the overriding thing here necessarily, right? I think Karen brought up logging a steep slope would be a really bad idea. So if we had an easement there for that, that would be.
I don't know if an easement really prevents the landowner from logging, though.
Depends
Okay.
how
Certainly does.
it depends.
You have to have a plan.
Does it?
If you specify that as the parameters of the easement, that is going to be tailored for specifically what it is, what conservation values you want to protect. Absolutely. There could be no logging, there could be logging only designated with a forest plan that has been approved by a forester. So there's not going to be a one size fits all. Each conservation easement is going to be slightly different depending on what the conservation values are on it.
I could see that being a 2.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like 2 was the common response for that.
Especially given, the effects of climate change in the future. And also, I do think there is a terrific problem of erosion in Lansing.
Yeah.
Major issue.
Along the lakeshore, yeah. See it a
Mhm.
lot here where I live.
Mhm.
Okay, we're getting to the end. We're almost there. Scenic view. Does it have one? I put that I would like more feedback, and I got plenty of feedback. Let's see. The byway, it was discussed that the byway itself, that that 1,000 foot buffer is probably not important to this metric because it's so narrow and it's basically roadside. But if it's near or contains one of our scenic views, I'm understanding it from the scenic resources index that it would be, we'd get a point. I don't know how many points, maybe just 1. Everything so far is getting a 2 or a 3, so we need some 1s.
Yeah. Yeah, this could be a 1.
Everything is important.
No, I agree too, and I think when I wrote that strong comment about it's too narrow to be of conservation value, I think that was before we had 1,000 feet.
Okay. So would this be any point? How do we objectively measure this? Any point that's within the scenic byway buffer, 1,000 feet to 500 foot buffer, and anything that is. So how do we know if it contains it? Are we looking at viewshed maps to determine that? Are we looking at the points in our scenic resources index and just saying, is it near?
I think you go out there and with your eyeballs, you look at it and you say, from this point, there's a great viewshed, because remember that we chose 1,000 feet and 500 feet for the simplicity of it, not because it was uniformly gorgeous for 1,000 feet on either side of the road, right? So I actually don't think that the overlay zone itself is the criterion. I think it's an aesthetic that is going to have a subjective component to it, because there's definitely going to be places in that 1,000-foot overlay that are not important at all. You know what I'm saying?
I do, because I'm actually going to just take that out entirely, because just this afternoon I was discussing with the co-chairs, this other property, this Emily Jonas Falls, it's actually very scenic, but it's not in our scenic resources index and probably should have been. But our tools do not capture all of the scenic views, and maybe we shouldn't say that it has to be next to one of those points or along the byway, because we've probably overlooked some scenic areas.
Oh, yeah.
And especially because we only looked at scenic areas on public lands, and these are private lands. So of course there's going to be scenic views that we don't know about. So I'm just going to shorten that right up. So that's good.
Wasn't the scenic resources inventory only from roads and public lands?
Yes.
Pretty
Yeah,
much, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so I mean, Emily Jonas Falls and my backyard, and probably everybody's backyard, could be scenic.
Right,
you
but
know-
this is a private land conservation easement, so I'm just going to take away. Yeah, I'm going to take away that language about it having to be designated as scenic.
No, I'm with you on that, Robin.
agree.
But I would vote for making this 2 points, because I think aesthetic value is very important.
But from a conservation perspective, maybe not. That's a human value. That's a human value, not a wildlife value. Or a plant value. Maybe plants care. I don't know. Maybe, I don't think they do, though. So should we be careful about labeling like human values into this?
I mean, it's a really good question, but I think
Yeah.
a lot of our response to nature has a very strong aesthetic component. And when we think about Bell Station, for example, I think our hearts do a little flip-flop at the idea that it could be preserved, and it's so close to the lake. And yes, there's conservation value with Bell Station. It's also drop dead gorgeous when you look at those Bill Heck photos. And that's the scenic view part of it. So I don't know. I do think it's important, but just to, in the interest of moving along, I'll just put a little note in, a mental note for the scenic view.
Plus
done
one.
so much work at CAC. Let's see how the points shake out.
Robin, I'm not looking at the spreadsheet itself. I'm looking at your screen share. How much spread do we have on the point scale that we have? Is there anything that resembles the a weighting factor, or are we just giving everything high grades?
We're giving everything a high grade. There's something.
Yeah. So this is not helpful.
Well, no, wait. We're specifying the maximum number of points it can receive, right? Okay. And it's going to be either 0, 1, 2, and very rarely 3, right? So
no, it's like not really. It's mostly like it gets the number of points as a way to weight that criteria. So if it was a scenic view, it would get a 1. If it had erodible soils, it would get whatever we said, a 2. And then it adds it up down here to rank the whole property.
I see, yeah.
And the only time it's really a gradation is when there's a specification that it is.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting, because I was viewing it differently. I was seeing it as the ceiling of how many points it could earn for that category.
Well, I think the next step is to hand this over to somebody else, right? And then maybe they can work out their scoring system.
You're doing such a good job.
This is the last one on the scale, and it has to do with extractive resources. I don't feel like the comments really helped me here because CJ says it's a property rights question. Mineral rights are sometimes not under the control of the property owner. I didn't understand what this comment meant. So maybe if that's John, maybe you can tell me what that means.
The PDR is development rights, and it's a state program. So I just checked with Scott Doyle to see when they do those, whether or not they accept these extractive resource leases, you know, if they would accept a property that has those. And he said that they do, but that the lease would have to be secondary to the easement.
They would say that again, John? They would have to be secondary to the easement?
Secondary, yeah.
If the easement is put on the property subsequent to the mineral lease, how could you retroactively make the mineral lease subordinate?
He may have been saying that they could add them later. I didn't get a lot of clarification, but that was his response to me on that.
Huh.
That they don't necessarily, you know, you're definitely out if you have one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, there's not a whole lot of oil and gas drilling happening in the
Yeah,
county.
because I was thinking,
The whole issue of split estate is really not something that we see here in Tompkins County. It's much more of a Western states thing. So, I mean, I appreciate CJ's comment there, but it's really not that applicable.
I think with
Do we-
fracking, they do that, right? You can come in sideways at a property and get fracking rights below the property.
But
Or salt mining.
salt mining would be included under extractive resources.
That's
And
probably
we
true,
had
yeah.
a lot of salt mining.
Yeah, should we just remain silent on this one and just not have it in here? It seems dicey, and like you mentioning salt mining, like I live next to Cargill. I don't know if they have rights under my property or not. I don't even actually know. Maybe they do.
Your deed would say so.
Oh, I have to look at it then because I'm not sure. They're right next door to me.
You're probably affected regardless.
I'm affected in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, other than in Carrie's neighborhood, the only area where the Cargill actually has rights are under the area around Rogues Harbor, but they're pretty much right under the lake, except for that shaft and the area around, you know, up at the Rogues Harbor
I
corner.
don't know. I think that's changing, Karen, with some of the pathways that they've been talking about, you know, pretty major ag lands. I think it'd be interesting. Andrew Benson might know something about that. But
I'm talking about currently where the mining's happened. I mean, I've been mapping it extensively, so with John. So I do know where those, you know, where the extractions happened. I don't know whether they're continuing to pursue that under land, not under the lake. I know they were talking about town land up in the north end of the town.
Yeah.
And also Andrus, but I think those expired. I'm pretty sure, but that would be good to find out.
yeah.
It might not be under the control of the person that wants to give an easement though. So I don't know if we should.
I think it's
this
beyond-
is almost
I think-
like a -1 point. Like you get minus points for this.
Well, I do wonder about whether there would be much of an impact on the conservation value of the land, even if there were extractive, you know, mining rights like salt. I just don't.
Yeah. Super different from gas.
So
Should I cross it out or leave it here?
So what would a gravel pit, which is, you're obviously working from the surface, that would come under this also, correct?
Absolutely. Good point. Yeah.
Mhm.
In those, the state program does not, they don't like those at all.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's my other neighbor. It's a gravel pit. um, yeah, I guess, I would say, I would probably like to remain silent on this one and not include it just because it's variable. It could be logging, it could be salt, it could be oil and gas, it could be a lot of things. Like Carrie said, it may or may not affect the conservation value of the property. So,
Well,
What-
but
It could be lumber too. I think we should keep something in there.
yeah,
I
I do
agree.
too.
I agree.
so but rather than give it a point, is this a negative? What is this? How are we grading this?
Well, I think you could give it a negative.
Yeah.
-1.
Or at least, well, I guess maybe, yeah, maybe 0 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because one of the things we're trying to do is to make sure that the conservation easement can be protected in perpetuity with as few
Yeah.
lawsuits as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if it were, when this checklist is describing current state, not are they going to log in the future. So if it were
Yeah.
like, the difference would be if it were land that was owned by Cotton Hanlon or whoever the big lumber people, Gutchess, are. That would be something that would be a real flag. But logging the property would be something that would be covered under the
The easement
provisions
itself.
the provisions of the easement. But I think that John's point about the gravel mining, I think we need to figure out a way to put that in, because that is going to impact air quality, it's going to impact sound, it's going to impact water quality, habitat. I mean, basically it's like the antithesis of anything conservation related.
I mean, it could be more the history of extractive use of the land or something like that.
Mhm.
Like if it was recently a gravel pit. So I don't know.
So that
I
would
think
be
in that case, we could look at the property and just say, no,
Yeah,
thank you.
I guess, yeah. Probably.
We don't want this.
Sort of obvious.
This is the last item. I've used up a lot of time, so I want to be mindful of the time and maybe just turn it back. If you guys want to keep going, we can, but I've used a ton of time, so I want to just point that out.
If we kept going, what would you do, Robin?
This is the last formal one, and this one we kind of had the scenic view. We already talked about that, and the answer was yes. And then this is just a reminder that CJ says interest in real property requires significant legal review, and somebody has to keep track of them, and they require annual enforcement and monitoring and a management plan. So, I guess that's just a reminder to us to just not be handing them out frivolously, I guess is the point there. So
And it's part of our mandate to identify parcels and consider parcels. So this, I hear the concern, but I do think we're definitely on track in doing this.
I think as long as we're just judicious about it.
Yeah.
You asked me what I would do next. There was one more thing I wanted to say, and I didn't put it in here or send an email around, but there was a recent RFP for a grant proposal for towns to request money for conservation easements, and I sent it to CJ, and CJ just kind of gave it a quick, like, yeah, sounds good kind of response. So I think it's something that we could apply for. There is some state money for us to, I suppose, acquire conservation easements. I don't know if we buy them or how it works, but I can send around that RFP. But I
Yeah,
I suppose we need some candidate properties if we're going to apply for grant funds. I don't know if we have a strong case if we don't identify anything that we want to preserve, so.
What do you know about the orchards, David? Have you heard anything
Oh,
through your department?
Yes, actually, but I didn't want to add to the agenda at the last minute, but just a couple days ago, I talked to the Cornell's the horticulture section, Maine apple faculty, and they have gotten word recently that they are starting to, the wheels are really seeming to be turning about selling some of that property. Not he and the primarily Justine Vandenhovel, who's actually the chair of the horticulture section, but is the great person. So he's the apple guy, she's the apple woman. And they have really put their foot down about maintaining the research properties, the active apple and grape vineyard areas of that. But his feeling was there's movement afoot that the rest of the properties are likely to go up for sale soon. Or like, there's really a lot of green lights seem to be flashing. And so he and the other faculty who are fruit physiologists and experts really made clear that because this is one of the few places where Cornell owns some lakefront property, where of course a lot of the orchards and vineyards in the state are, it was precious to them to maintain that research facility with the apples and grapes. But they were not successful at defending, the rest of the property that was not actively being used in research. So he kind of felt like so that's what I've got just through the scuttlebutt of the department, but from a very good source, I would say. Not to be quoted here, I guess, but not the particular person.
No, this is being recorded and streamed on YouTube.
Yeah, well, anyway.
Strike it from the record. Well, okay, so Robin, back to your point.
He's concerned about the property too, but it does sound like the research, the areas that are really currently in, apples and grapes, and not all of them, but the ones that are actively being used for research now and in the likely future are going to be protected. But there seems to be wheels turning to really start thinking about selling the other property, the other aspects of that property.
So
I haven't sent him, I was going to send to him and the other faculty and, involved with those crops in that section, our correspondence with the real estate office at Cornell. Do you think that's appropriate? Just for them to know kind of where we stood on that and we've had these conversations. I mean, informally they know because I've told them, but I could forward that letter to let the letter back and forth with those folks.
yeah, I think at a previous meeting, we said that was fine. That's my recollection, at least that you could send it to the chair, for example.
Yeah, so I can do that to give that to Justine and just, so we're kind of basically, just to let them know as well, that informally kind of that we have been concerned about this and so that's where that stands. That's all I know.
So that's helpful. And back to your question, Robin, about the RFP for acquisition of lands. Maybe we need to take a look at the deadline and
April 13.
okay.
So it's relatively soon.
I'd be willing to look at that and figure out what to do and connect with CJ about how to work something like that through the town. Does anybody else want to work on that with me?
The one sticky point is that it does say all properties acquired through this grant program are required to allow 100% public access, and any restrictions such as cliffs or mud flats have to be in alignment with the goals of the program. So they do want it to be public access, and I'm thinking maybe that's not appropriate for many backyard conservation easements, but could be for something like Bell Station or something like
the
that.
Lansing Orchard area too.
Where public access is desired. And the orchard, something that's just a requirement that it should be public access.
Yeah, it might be good to look into that.
That's all I have. That's it. for me
Contact
talking.
the real estate office.
Here,
at
you can take it
Cornell.
away.
So I can take a look at that. And if anybody wants to join me, that's all, the more the merrier. And then David, it sounds like you'll forward the correspondence.
Yeah, I'll make
Robin,
sure that our chair particularly knows that we have been in touch with the real estate office, that basically, there's some backing from the town of Lansing via us for, putting that land to appropriate use if it is sold, and that kind of, basically what we said in our correspondence with them, that we'd like kept in touch and all of that. So in any kind of informal, because, those folks could have some informal, in the hallway, meetings with people talking about it and stuff besides formal meetings they might have. So just good to know, good for them to know clearly that the town of Lansing is, it's on their radar, that land, that property. Yeah.
definitely. So Robin, as far as the list of criteria, was I perceiving that you want to hand it off, or do you want to bring it to the next stage?
I guess I just don't know what else I can do with it. I thought you made a comment in one of your emails about this being something that the consultant could work on with the open space inventory, but maybe I misunderstood
Yeah, I think
your comment.
there's an interim step where we would need to maybe,
Other than cleaning up the comments in the point system.
that would be great.
Yeah, I think going on what we covered tonight, you could summarize that list, and then we have something pretty solid, I think.
Mhm. Is that something you're willing to do, Robin? She might have frozen at the thought.
She's either staying very still or frozen.
Saved by the internet.
Just
And
as she
who's
was
it go
about to
to?
say.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Uh-oh.
You're cutting out, Robin.
We didn't quite get, we think the answer was yes. We're just going to go with that.
You could put it in the chat.
Yeah.
If you don't say anything, we'll assume it's yes.
All in favor.
Just kidding.
Well, Robin, even though you're not here, thank you very much. You did a really good job of walking us through all of this.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah,
One thing I
it's
think we
good.
Mm-hmm.
should do is maybe all take one more look at it, and make sure there's not redundancies. Are people getting 4 free points for basically the same feature on their land? That was one thing that wasn't very clear to me, because we had
Yeah.
riparian areas, seems like that overlapped with some other features that were in the thing, and I don't know. That's the only thing when we were going through it. And when I went through it initially, I didn't understand exactly what was going on until Robin explained it tonight. So I don't know. That's the only thing I think of that might be something we could do before it goes away. But yeah, thanks, Robin. It was really a good summary, and I like all the features we've agreed upon.
Todd, are you willing to take now that you're enlightened, are you willing to take a peek at it for redundancies? Uh-oh.
We're losing everybody.
just when I'm pushing them for commitments. How convenient.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it over the weekend.
Great. Awesome. Did you catch that, Robin?
I got Todd's going to take a look at it, but I went away for a little bit.
Yeah, Todd's going to take a look for redundancies, and we're all thanking you for all the work that you did on it, which is really fabulous. Thanks.
And Karen too.
And
Mostly
Karen. Thank you.
I'm good for strong opinions, if nothing else, right?
Very helpful.
So yes, if we can get all this summarized, I think we have a pretty solid document, or at least a draft of a very solid document. Okay, shall we move on to Code Revision Committee explanation? CJ sent something out about that. This is not going to take a lot of time. I will just read what she put out. The town's new code revision committee is intended to be an advisory committee to provide the initial drafts of zoning code revisions to the relevant boards and committees, as well as recommend any final drafts of zoning/code revisions to the town board based on their directive per the following resolution. So they're going to have, the town is going to have a separate committee that is going to try to redo the zoning with the help of other committees. And I guess the important part here is who is on the committee. There's the chair of the ZBA, the chair of the planning board, Guy Crow, the town lawyer, Ed Levine, the supervisor, CJ Randall, the code enforcement officer, Scott Russell, and Joe Wetmore, who's town board member, and John Zepko, who's also a planner. I think that Joe would probably do a pretty good job of representing a lot of the thoughts on this committee. And you know, if they ask for our advice, fine, but I don't know if they will. But that's what this code revision committee is about. And there does seem to be a very urgent need to get the zoning redone, because the comprehensive plan was passed in 2018 and it's still not done. Does anybody have any questions about that? We were hoping CJ was going to say something about it, but she's not here.
I guess all that I'll say is that if those revisions do go through, a lot of the things that we're concerned about on the conservation easement list are going to be covered, particularly the steep slopes and the riparian areas. So that's a really good thing.
Do you
Okay.
need somebody on that committee who's
No.
pushing? We don't need it?
The
Well,
committee is already formed.
That-
Okay.
that's-
Yeah.
But we can provide input as asked, from what I understand.
Okay.
Or if you have a particular concern, you can speak to somebody that's on the committee and voice your concern.
And Joe has been advocating for those particular environmental elements since the comp plan. So I know that he'll do his best to champion that.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Okay, so does anybody have anything else to add about the code revision committee? I think that's pretty straightforward. It's just a description of what they're up to, or what they will be up to. I think they met today. And I think one of the discussions was about the cryptocurrency mining issue. But well, I listened to the town board meeting last night, and the impression I got is that they're not going to do a moratorium. They're going to write a law. They figure it's going to take just as long, or it might even be shorter, to write the law and not allow proof of work crypto mining in Lansing. That's my understanding of it. So that's good, I think. Okay, moving on to number 7, overlay district for Cayuga Lake Scenic Byway. Karen sent, so Karen, do you want to say something about your presentation to the planning board?
Yeah, I could just quickly summarize that, well, actually, let's see, John Fleming, you're still on. John did a fabulous job. Did you want to actually
Yeah.
say, John, how that went? Because you did the lion's share of the work at that meeting.
Oh, let me think back to that.
Yeah, for the
No, that was,
planning board.
that was great, John. I thought
Did the
you
heavy
did a really
lifting.
good job.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that came up was how it was kind of difficult for us to, know what these boundaries should be if we had no idea really what, because there were some questions, kind of why and how we came up with what we did, and we didn't have the greatest answer because we didn't really know what was going to result from what we picked as a geographic area to control. Really was one of the main things. And then they did bring up in terms of the view sheds, I think they thought there is going to be, it could be quite a bit of difference between leaf off and leaf on in terms of what a view really would be. So that's why they requested that that Karen put together the one with leaf on, and to give them a better idea of what realistic views might be. But from what the email that I saw from Karen today, they may not be very realistic. They might be going the other way and restricting the view more than what it is in reality.
And then I think on the docket is another meeting down the road where we explain, the assumptions in the maps that Karen did, but we maybe meet with them along with the code revision committee, because some of the planning board's questions were specific to, okay, what's going to be allowed versus not allowed in this overlay district. And that's when we said, hey, it's going to be up to this code revision committee. So I think we'll need to eventually get on the agenda with the planning board and
I think,
do a round.
sorry.
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was just thinking that seeing how, I don't know, they were very determined that to have those leaf on views, which are just models, but I think it would be really helpful when we do go back and present to them that we actually have a photograph rather than these computer generated things, because that's ultimately, what's going to be seen.
That's a good point.
All I can do is model stuff. And if, there's an agricultural field and the corn is more, tall than I am, it's going to obstruct the view, but it's not going to be corn every year. So, there's a lot of like squishiness in that kind of assessment.
I found the leaf on views not very helpful, because it looks, as I said in my email today, it looks like you've got a 6-foot fence along the road on both sides, and so there's no view. So I don't see how they're going to get any useful information out of us showing them that. I think your idea of actual pictures that would be great. I think that's a good idea.
When you guys went around with the viewfinder, did you not take pictures at the same time? No?
No.
Oh, that would have been
That was not part of our assignment.
Well, it was also a time when the leaves were off.
And Robin says we were driving. Well, one person was driving and another had the viewfinder. It was very complicated.
Yeah, it was also winter, and that's we all know that that's not the best season for photographing a roadside view in Lansing. Fall is the best time.
So yeah, I like the idea of the photos. I think by the time the leaves are on, it could be quite a bit later in the spring. And if there's any hurry whatsoever to get the overlay district cranking along, we'll just have to see about the timing of that. But it's a good idea. So I'm willing to kind of connect with CJ and figure out, and also Tom, maybe you'll have some advice about the next meeting with the planning board and how we can be prepared for that. And anybody interested in doing the next round with the planning board whenever that happens?
Well, I think before we do that, the idea of pictures, even if it is wintertime, I think it makes some sense.
Okay, so that'd be more leaf off.
Yeah, but you can still tell where the view's going to be in the summertime, I think.
Okay.
I mean, the other thing is, Karen, can you do view sheds with a two foot high? No, please. A 2 foot high leaf on?
I don't think it would make sense to do that, and I don't really have
Okay.
now
Okay.
to have another
Okay.
exercise. Sorry.
Well, I'd be willing to go around with somebody and take pictures.
You recycle any of the photos we took for the Scenic Resources Index?
Oh, yeah, we could get some from there probably.
Because I'm kind of with Karen on this, and I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this, and we've worked on it for months, and maybe in the interest of time, we just give photos that we already have, and use the maps that we already have.
Okay, but I'm not sure they're going to get any value out of seeing leaf on view sheds.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned it could really work against the whole concept.
I mean, given how hypothetical it is, and as you know, it's not just the potential height of whether it's a 2 foot high corn stalk or a 7 foot high corn stalk. It's the fact that the data that I have that are representing that land cover that this whole thing is generated off of are blocks that are 90 by 90 feet on a side. Okay, so there's just a coarseness to it that really obstructs a good analysis when you're talking about stuff that's within a few hundred feet. It's great when you're looking at an expanse and can you see the tower up by Carrie's house for Cargill from Taganic? On that scale it works great, but not on a scale that is so tight to to the roadway that we're looking at. So I think that the views in the inset map that I did that show a couple of them where you can look all the way down the lake from that place. You might not be able to see what's going on directly alongside of the road, but you do have access to the far views. It still works for that, but not with what I have to work with right now.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Okay, well, I agree with Carrie that I don't think showing them the leaf on pictures, I don't know if that's going to be helpful. Except for some of those small inset ones, yeah.
Tom, maybe you and I can talk about kind of next steps and
Okay,
involve other CAC members as needed.
well, I think, I mean, I'm certainly willing to go out and take pictures.
Okay,
I mean, I don't have the best camera on my phone, but I guess it'll have to do.
okay.
You do have a great microphone now, Tom. I want to say hooray for that. What a difference.
Yeah, yeah, that was a little embarrassing last meeting.
Big
It happened
improvement.
at the planning board meeting I was at too, so I invested $40 in a decent headset.
That's great. So I would like to propose that we talk about the work plan at the next meeting. It's important, but not urgent.
Yay.
Yeah, this is, we're already over 2 hours here. We can skip the work plan, the open space index. At this point, there's not much we can do. We got to wait till we hear from CJ and the potential consultants. So I don't think that really deserves too much in the way of discussion at this point, unless anybody wants to say anything about it. And I guess that's the last topic for tonight.
Great. Thanks for leading us through, Tom.
Well, I think Robin did more leaning than anybody. That was great, Robin.
Awesome.
Good job.
You need a
Yeah, I think we made some real progress on that. That was great.
Yeah, no, it was important. It was
Yeah.
good discussion.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, is there any new business that anybody wants to bring up? Okay, would anybody like to move to end the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Okay. And I'm sure somebody's going to second it, and I think everybody's going to
second.
approve.
I'll
Okay.
second.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That was a good session. And
Thank
and
you.
thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Okay.
Okay, everybody have a
Alright.
good evening. Enjoy the snowstorm. And
Yeah.
Right on.
David, are you back in the?
Yeah, I'm back in the
Okay.
North Country. Yeah, I came back for the snow. Yeah.
Okay, well, you got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Great meeting.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.